Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can also email me at the email address on the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. We'll start off with a quick look at some of the advisories and warnings that we do have out for the state right now. Starting off in the Thompson Pass area, we do have a blizzard warning that is going to be in effect from 9 p.m. this evening, Tuesday evening, until 6 p.m. on Wednesday. That again is for Thompson Pass, and visibilities could drop down to a quarter mile or less at times through the pass. Then that is going to transition over to a high wind warning that will be in effect until 4 p.m. on Thursday, with winds getting as high as 75 miles per hour. And once it transitions over to the high wind warning, those winds are going to dip down into this town of Valdez as well, not just through Thompson Pass area. We also have a wind chill advisory out for the Susitna Valley from areas from Broad Pass and further to the north. And that is going to be in effect from 9 p.m. this evening until noon on Thursday. Moving out to look for southeastern portions of the state, we have a winter storm warning for snow for areas around Yakutat. That's going to be for 5 to 7 inches of snow. That's going to be in effect from 3 a.m. on Wednesday until 3 p.m. on Wednesday. A little bit further to the east near the Haines area, winter weather advisory for snow, and that's going to be in effect from 6 a.m. on Wednesday until 9 p.m. on Wednesday. Then up along the Arctic coastline in these northeastern portions of the state, we do have wind chill warnings out. Both of those are going to be out until noon on Wednesday, and temperatures could dip as low as minus 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, if you want to check your local listings in the weather.gov/Alaska website, you can check out any updates to any of those products as we move out through time. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, we'll start with one low that's southern areas of the Gulf that is pushed inland now, but further to the north we'll notice we have another low sitting by just east of Kenai Peninsula in this kind of range by Prince William Sound area, bringing a lot of westerly flow out towards the Alaska Peninsula area, or Alaska Panhandle area. And then as we move back over the main part of the state, you can see this northerly flow coming down the western portions of the state, starting to push through some of these gaps, and you can see some of that gap flow with some of the cloud types there moving through some of those passes. That is causing some gusty winds, stronger seas, and we're going to see some freezing spray from some of those areas as well, but we have that Arctic air mass just pushing down further inland over the state. And finally, way out to the west, we have some low cloud cover, and you can start to see some clouds coming in from another system that's going to approach us later on tomorrow. But for now, we just have high pressure dominating the area with just some lower stratus underneath the high pressure. Taking a look now at the forecast for the rest of today, we do have that high out to the west over the western Bering and Aleutians. Further off to the east with that northerly flow, we do have some snow showers coming into the Alaska Peninsula down through the central Aleutian Islands, as would be expected primarily on the Bering side with that northerly flow. Then all along the west coast we have some scattered showers going down into the Bristol Bay area, and then we do have some areas of blowing snow around St. Lawrence Island. Interior and northern part of the state, not a lot of precip, but as we get closer to our low pressure system near the Prince William Sound area, we are going to see some more snow in these areas. Some of that pressure gradient there is going to create those stronger winds to give us those blowing snow conditions. And then as we look into the Panhandle, we do have in northern locations some snow, but warmer air underneath, giving us a mix of rain and snow for central and southern locations of the Panhandle. We do expect primarily to see rain closer towards the water and snow as we get to higher elevations. Then into tonight, getting a little bit colder down for much of the Panhandle, primarily snow except for the very southern portions of the area where we'll still see a mix of rain and snow. Although not really moving a whole lot, staying kind of in the northern part of the Gulf of Alaska, still bringing snow to the eastern portions of south central, and we're going to see some snow in the Alaska Range as well. Not much for the rest of the mainland part of the state, but down the west coast of the state we do have snow showers starting to mix with fog as we get closer to the YK Delta and Bristol Bay area. Snow showers for the Alaska Peninsula and eastern part of the Aleutian Islands. That high pressure starting to push off further to the east now, making way for this next system to approach from the south, bringing snow showers for tonight. Then on Wednesday, bringing heavier snow as that front starts to push closer in with some warmer air coming up behind it. Our ridging still staying off over the Aleutian Islands, and northerly flow bringing more snow to the Alaska Peninsula and down into the eastern Aleutians. High pressure extending now into interior part of the state, keeping much of the precipitation further off to the south. Some of the areas in the mountains still going to see some light snow showers, and our low finally making it slowly to the east, pushing off precipitation to the eastern portions of south central. And then down in the Panhandle area, we are going to see some snow in the northern locations, mixing with rain as we get further to the south with another system coming up from the south. As that system approaches, we are going to see a mix of snow and rain in southern portions of the Panhandle and some showers of snow further to the north. High pressure dominating mainland Alaska with just some light snow showers up by AKwx and some areas of blowing snow from Point Hope down through the Bering Strait. Our system out to the west is pushed into the southern part of the Bering Sea, extending snow out over the eastern Aleutian Islands and the western Aleutian Islands on the backside of that low, but some warmer air underneath, bringing in some rain to the central Aleutians. For our temperatures, starting off in the Aleutian Islands around 30 degrees, dropping down into the teens as we get to Bristol Bay area and into the negative numbers. All negative teens all along the coastline, a little bit warmer to the west, and in the minus 30s to minus 40s, pushing down into the interior. Warming up as we get back to south central Alaska, negative single digits, and then staying right around 30 degrees for the Panhandle. Into Wednesday afternoon, getting into the mid 30s for the Panhandle area, and right around 10 degrees for south central, staying below zero all through the interior up along the Arctic coastline, staying in the negative 20s up there. Single digits along the west coast of the state, and then getting up into the mid 30s for the Aleutians. Moving into Thursday morning, dropping down right around freezing for the Aleutians, down into the negatives as we get into Bristol Bay area. Negative all along the coastline, and then minus 30s up along the North Slope coast, and then down or into the interior as well, and into the 30s for the southern portions of the Panhandle. Thursday afternoon, getting up to around 40 degrees, colder to the north, staying below zero for much of mainland Alaska, in the teens for south central, and then right around 40 degrees for the Aleutians.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll take a quick look at the flying weather. Out over the Bering Sea, a lot of VFR in the central locations, but as we get further out to the west, we are going to see some MVFR conditions, and out over the Pribilof Islands down into the Alaska Peninsula. All along the west coast, we are expecting MVFR conditions Wednesday morning with some areas of IFR up along the Arctic coastline. And then in the interior, we are seeing MVFR conditions in the western and central locations, but as we get further to the east, expecting more IFR conditions to develop. Then out in the Copper River Basin and into the Wrangell-St. Elias, we are seeing some IFR conditions, and along the North Gulf Coast down into southeast Alaska, MVFR conditions with IFR expected in the more northerly locations. Then on Wednesday afternoon, still going to see a lot of MVFR down in southeast Alaska. As we get into the mainland areas, we are going to see a little bit more IFR conditions out by Yakutat as well. Then in eastern portions of the interior up through the Arctic coastline, we are going to see some MVFR conditions there. Primarily VFR throughout mainland Alaska, with an area up by Point Hope that is going to see some MVFR conditions. Down through the Alaska Peninsula, VFR out into the central Aleutian Islands. But as that next system comes up from the south, we are expecting IFR conditions to expand further to the north and to the east with that incoming system. Then out by the Pribilof Islands, expecting VFR conditions. Thursday morning, that system is continuing to push its front further into the Bering Sea, spreading IFR conditions to the central Aleutian Islands out near the eastern Aleutian Islands. Not quite to the Pribilofs as well, but we do have an area of IFR out of the Makoriak area and up towards St. Lawrence Island as well. MVFR conditions from the YK Delta up along the Arctic coastline with some IFR conditions in the most northwestern portions of the state. Out in the eastern parts of the interior, we're going to have some MVFR conditions expected Thursday morning, and that's going to continue down into southeast Alaska. Thursday afternoon, we're going to see that area of MVFR conditions in the Panhandle diminish, pushing further to the south with areas in central and southern locations of the Panhandle still seeing MVFR conditions. VFR for much of mainland Alaska until we get up into the Brooks Range and up along the Arctic coastline, expecting MVFR conditions there. Then IFR conditions out by the Point Hope and Point Lay areas. As we get down into the Bering Strait area down through St. Lawrence Island, we are going to expect some MVFR conditions there, and then widespread MVFR and IFR conditions to the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands as that frontal system continues to push further off to the north and east. For our pass conditions, we'll start off on Wednesday. AKwx Pass is expected to be MVFR throughout the day, as well as Adigan Pass. Moving down into the Alaska Range, Lake Clark should be VFR throughout the day. However, Merrill will start off marginal and then improve to VFR later in the afternoon. Then Rainy Pass start off marginal as well, improve to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Windy Pass will start off IFR, improve to marginal conditions in the afternoon. Isabel Pass should be MVFR throughout the day. And Mentasta will start off MVFR and then drop down to IFR conditions in the afternoon. Tenita will start off MVFR, improve to VFR. And Portage will also start off MVFR, improving to VFR in the afternoon. Down in the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White both expected to be IFR throughout the day on Wednesday. Taking us to our freezing levels, we have our freezing level moving through the Panhandle area, then dipping south through the Gulf of Alaska, staying south of our area, coming back into the central Aleutian Islands and staying in the southern part of the Bering Sea out to the west. Our icing below 7,000 feet is expected for the western Aleutian Islands and then pushing into the central Aleutian Islands, and this is expected to push further into the east and north as that frontal system pushes further into the area. Then out over the Panhandle between 2,000 and 6,000 feet is expected. That does include Yakutat and approaching the Cordova and Valdez areas as well. Taking us down for our jet stream, out over the western portion of the state, northerly flow around 80 knots, westerly flow around 80 knots over the northern part of the Bering Sea, and then 105 southerly jet coming in over the western Aleutian Islands, exiting out of the north 90 knots over the eastern Aleutians. We do have flow primarily out of a westerly direction, 20 to 25 knots out over the Bering Sea, getting as high as 70 knots to the south of the western Aleutian Islands. Out over mainland Alaska, northerly flow 25 to 30 knots, getting up as high as 50 to 55 knots out over the Alaska Peninsula, and then up to as high as 40 knots out of a southerly direction over the Panhandle. For our 3,000 feet, we do have a pretty similar flow out of a southerly direction, 35 to 40 knots over the Panhandle, stronger to the south, but shouldn't make it into the Panhandle area. Northerly flow out over the western portion of the state, 20 to 25 knots, diminishing as we get further to the east, and then 50 knots over the Alaska Peninsula down in the Cook Inlet area and Kodiak Island. And then we have flow out of a southerly direction getting as high as 60 knots to the south of the western Aleutians. Our turbulence below 2,000 feet over the western Aleutian Islands is expected. Out over southwest Alaska into the Kenai Peninsula, below 6,000 feet expected there, and below 5,000 in the southern portions of the Panhandle.
Some places on the surface you might have these steep cracks and giant fissures that you would have to be careful not to fall into. In other places you might see towers of ice right next to places that were relatively smooth. You might see places that were dark. Ice there takes the form of rock. It's frozen solid until you dig down into that ocean. So you may see some things that look similar to Earth, but you may see some things that are very different.
That voice you just heard?
I am Morgan Kramer, NASA scientist.
I love it.
That's Morgan. She's probably one of NASA's best spokespeople for exploring our solar system's icy moons.
Europa's a fascinating place. It has this liquid water ocean that's about 3 times the volume of all of Earth's oceans combined. That's a lot of water.
To understand what makes Earth so special, sometimes you need to back up and take in the big picture. Remember, the cryosphere is every place on Earth with frozen water. And water is one of the biggest indicators for life.
Every place, at least so far, that we have found life, we found water along with it.
And so far, Earth is the only planet we know of with life. Although Europa isn't the only icy moon in our solar system, NASA has identified it as one of those places with key astrobiological potential. Morgan is a collaborator on the Mapping Imaging Spectrometer for Europa, an instrument selected for NASA's next mission to Jupiter's icy moon Europa. But she's also more than just a scientist working in a laboratory. She's preparing future NASA missions for success on the surface of alien worlds. This year, Morgan and her colleagues were in the field studying how life colonizes in fresh lava.
Earth, it turns out, has a lot of excellent, what we call analog environments, places that are similar enough to some of these other worlds that we can conduct some tests and we can do some analyses here. Now, they're not perfect, of course. They're not going to be exactly like Europa, but we can still learn a lot by testing in these environments. Some of these places include Antarctica and the Arctic Circle, but there are other places too, Alaska, Greenland, even Iceland. Any place where you have a lot of ice, because guess what the surface of Europa is made of? A lot of ice.
Studying the cryosphere doesn't just have big implications for Earth. It also matters for the frozen worlds in our own cosmic backyard.
If we're able to find life or evidence of past life on a place like Europa, that tells us that not only can life happen in other places, but it's common enough that it happened at least twice in the same tiny solar system. That means that the universe is wide open in terms of how much life we might find, the types of life we might find. It would revolutionize how we see ourselves and the possibilities for contact in the universe. It would be amazing. Oh, it's so exciting.
As it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. So it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving. My interest in glaciers comes from the sheer size of these things and how much they're able to change on human timescales. And so the amount of mass and energy being transferred by glaciers around the globe is tremendous. It's an absolutely fascinating thing to study from space.
Mountain glaciers are some of the most charismatic parts of the cryosphere. Some might cling to the edges of cliffs at higher elevations, then lay bare and flat in a broad plain, looking cracked and weathered like elephant skin, before tumbling thousands of feet toward the sea and terminating in a dramatic calving front. They're like motion frozen in time, until they aren't. They tell a story about the distant past and yet are incredibly responsive to the present. You can understand why they'd be captivating to all of us, and especially cryospheric scientists. Meet Alex Gardner, a cryospheric scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who is going to help break down what a classic West Coast North American glacier might look like, where high amounts of snow dump onto the mountains.
And at higher elevations, there's melt in summer, but not enough melt to get rid of all of that snow. And so that snow accumulates, it compacts, it turns into ice, and it starts to flow under its own weight, and it flows down the valleys. And as it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. And so it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out and down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving.
Alex uses satellite data to study large-scale changes in glacial ice. But 2,000 miles to the north, Chris Larson from the University of Alaska Fairbanks spends a lot of time studying glaciers from the air. He's been flying over Alaskan mountain glaciers for many years, most recently on a NASA-funded mission called Operation Icebridge Alaska. He's absolutely enamored with his local rivers of ice.
And what do you love about mountain glaciers?
Well, they're in mountains, so they're really pretty.
You couldn't ask for a better way to experience Alaska on a large scale than to go flying around for campaign after campaign and look at all of the mountains in Alaska. Truly infinite. You just feel like you'll never see the end of them and don't want to either.
But Chris doesn't spend weeks away from home and family for the views. Chris and his colleagues at NASA want to answer some pretty big questions by learning more about Alaskan glaciers and how they tick.
You know, why does NASA care about these? Well, they actually disproportionately contribute a large amount to sea level rise.
In the long run, as the Earth warms due to climate change, the big ice sheets and mighty outlet glaciers of Greenland and Antarctica stand to contribute the most to sea level rise, simply because the vast majority of the planet's ice is stored there. But currently, it's the world's smaller mountain glaciers in comparatively warmer places like Alaska and Patagonia that are contributing about a third of all inputs to sea level rise, even though they account for only 1% of the world's ice.
Mostly due to them being dynamic. They have water at the bed, which allows them to slide fast, and they react quickly to climate change and have higher velocities than their polar counterparts.
Back at JPL, AKwx uses satellite measurements of global ice and computer models to predict ultimately how much sea level rise we might see due to climate change. But in the case of mountain glaciers, we also care about the local impacts of disappearing ice.
When we think of changes in ice sheets, we typically think of just what is the consequence for sea level rise and the future evolution of the ice sheets. But glaciers in other regions, like high mountain Asia, Alaska, the European Alps, these are places where changes in runoff matters to stream flows. In places like high mountain Asia, you have a lot of glaciers that feed the streams that flow down to populated regions. And that runoff becomes significant for water resources, irrigation, and agriculture.
Both Alex and Chris are passionate about understanding how glaciers are changing and what it means for our planet's future. They'll continue to use tools like elevation maps from the ICESat-2 satellite and detailed airborne measurements to monitor changing ice.
By the end of the tunnel, you're about 100 feet underground, and you're surrounded by bones sticking out of the wall from the steppe bison and the mastodons. There's sticks that are 40,000 years old. There's grass that's still green, that's tens of thousands of years old.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine forecast. We'll take a quick look at our ice edge. Big thing of note is that the ice edge is finally down to the Pribilof Islands, to the northern portion of St. Paul Island. We are starting to see some ice there. Otherwise, we have ice edge moving into Bristol Bay and down into the Alaska Peninsula as well. And then we still have ice through much of Cook Inlet area and down in Kamishak Bay. Starting off in the southeastern part of the state, southerly flow in the inside waters, 20 to 25 knots, and then out in the Gulf of Alaska, we do have southerly flow there as well, anywhere from 20 getting up to as high as 30 knots as we get further to the north, with gusts up to 40 knots near Yakutat. Then on Thursday, flow becoming more easterly for the Gulf, 30 to 35 knots, seas as high as 16 feet, highest in the south. And then in the inside waters, flow becoming more northerly. We do have stronger winds up in the Lynn Canal area, around 40 knots there, dropping down to 30 knots, then becoming east 10 as we get further to the south. For south central areas, we do have northerly flow on Wednesday, 30 knots up to 35 knots, and then we do have gusts out of the Hinchinbrook entrance area up to 65 knots, and that could also be out of the Copper River Delta. We do have flow in the Cook Inlet area of northerly direction, 10 to 20 knots, with the strongest winds here, storm force winds out of the Kamishak Bay area through the Barren Islands, northwesterly winds 50 knots with gusts as high as 65 knots. Then on Thursday, dropping down to 35 knots, 40 on the eastern side of the Barren Islands, seas as high as 13 feet. In Cook Inlet, we do have 15 to 20 knots, primarily out of a northerly direction. Northerly winds out of the northern part of the Gulf into Prince William Sound area, 30 to 35 knots, weaker as we get off to the east. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas, around Kodiak Island, northwesterly flow 45 to 50 knots. Gusts as we get through some of the bays and passes up to as high as 65 knots. A little bit weaker, 40 gusts 55 as we get further to the southern portions of the Alaska Peninsula. In the Bristol Bay area, 25 knots out of the northwest direction, and then getting stronger up to 35 knots as we move off to the west. On Thursday, flow still primarily out of that northwesterly direction around Kodiak Island, 30 to 40 knots, strongest on the eastern side of Kodiak Island, dropping down to 10 to 20 knots as we get further off to the Alaska Peninsula and switching to become out of a northeasterly direction out over the Bering side of the peninsula. For the Aleutian Islands, way out east by the eastern Aleutians, northwesterly flow 30 knots, but becoming southerly as we get out by the central Aleutian Islands, and then becoming more easterly as we push further off towards the western Aleutians, getting up to as high as 35 knots with seas as high as 13 feet. Then as we move into Thursday, flow becoming northwesterly by the western Aleutians, 35 knots, and then switching to become more southerly as we push off to the east and getting up to as high as 40 knots for the central Aleutian Islands, and then still southerly around 35 knots for the eastern Aleutian Islands. Seas are higher on the Pacific side, 14 to as high as 20 feet, strongest by the central Aleutians. Down the west coast of the state, starting up north, we have southerly flow, pretty weak, 5 to 10 knots, and then becoming stronger northwesterly winds as we get further down along the west coast and out by St. Matthew Island and the Pribilof Islands. getting up to as high as 25 knots. Then on Thursday, flow becoming more southeasterly, strongest out by St. Matthew Island and the Pribilof Islands, 25 to 30 knots there, but as we get along the coastline, 15 to 20 knots is expected, dropping down to 10 knots as we get into the Norton Sound area. Then along the Arctic coastline, starting off on the west coast, we do have southerly winds 10 to 15 knots becoming more westerly, 15 to 25 knots as we get by the Beaufort Sea. Then on Thursday, flow dropping down along the Arctic coastline, southerly winds 10 to 15 knots, and then staying southerly along the west coast up to as high as 30 knots, strongest by the Point Hope area. Quick recap for our weather. Moving into tonight, we have high pressure out over the Aleutian Islands with a system approaching from the south, starting to bring in some showers towards the western Aleutian Islands. Along the west coast of the state, we are expecting to see some isolated snow showers mixing with fog by the YK Delta area down into the Bristol Bay area. Northerly flow is going to bring some showers to the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutian Islands. And then low pressure out over the northern part of the Gulf of Alaska is bringing snow and winds to areas through the eastern portions of south central Alaska and to the Alaska Range as well. With those stronger winds, we are expecting some wind chills near the Broad Pass area for the Susitna Valley. And we are also seeing blizzard conditions for tonight period for the Thompson Pass area. Up along the Arctic coastline, we are going to have some wind chill warnings there with some cold temperatures dropping down to as low as -65 in those wind chills. And we also are going to get some heavy snow for areas around Yakutat, a winter storm warning for snow there. And then we are going to get some winter weather advisory for snow in the Haines area, also in effect tonight. And then we're going to continue to get snow through the southeastern part of the state, starting to mix with rain as we get to the more southern locations. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.